Um, so a while back, I mentioned this. I read the book Unbroken. Did anybody else read that book? Wasn't that a fantastic book? Like, I loved it. Loved it. And when the movie came out, I was incredibly disappointed. Have to be honest. In fact, disappointed. Angry would probably be a better way to describe me. As I said, just a normal. I'm always angry, but particularly at the movie for this reason. If you haven't read the book, I'll tell you the story. The title of the book is called Unbroken, and it's a true story about this guy who I always mess up his name, Louis Zamperini. Zamperini? That's a tough name. His parents are Italian. He comes to he's from the United States, and you just gotta like this kid because even as a little kid, he seemed to be born with an incredible willpower. And I know this is odd, but there's one point in the book where, it's a couple years that I read it, but it goes something like this. The kid can get really angry. He's very willful, and he's a little out of control, and he gets really upset. And at that point, his parents, his mother, I just find this so Italian, quickly makes him a sandwich and puts it in wax paper, and the father runs out and gives it to Louis because he knows when his kid gets angry, he's going to stay angry. So the reaction was make sure he got something to eat because he basically ran away from home and spent the night in an abandoned car in like Oakland. But he is just born with this incredible willpower, and he's kind of getting into trouble, so his older brother gets him into running. And he becomes actually an Olympic runner. He goes over to Germany for the Olympic Games just prior to World War II in Nazi Germany and becomes this great runner. But then he goes into the military in World War II, and this is when things really get hot, his plane gets shot down. And they survive something like 47 days in a raft, literally fighting off sharks. It's a really amazing story. Half-starved, and Louis, not that religious, but on the boat, there's one night that describes how beautiful the stars were. And he said, even though they're half-starved, he said they heard angels sing. And in the boat with the angels singing, he says this prayer to God, and he's not really that prayerful, but he makes a vow that if he gets out of this, he will spend the rest of his life serving God. And then they get rescued by the Japanese, but unfortunately gets thrown into a concentration camp. And things get worse. And then things get even worse in the concentration camp because he's moved to a worse place, and the commander, actually both places, there's this guy called the Bird, and he was a sociopath, and he made it his duty to try and break Louis. And here's the interesting part. No matter how hard things got, Louis wouldn't break. He's the type of person, if you give him a challenge, he'll rise up to the challenge. Now, the book is called Unbroken, so at this part of the book, Louis has such willpower and anger, he can overcome anything. And he's set free. Now, as I said, Louis can rise up to anything, but what he couldn't handle, oddly enough, was freedom. He comes back to the United States, marries the love of his life, and he actually ends up having children. But in freedom, what he suffers from is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And he's just filled with rage and anger. And he's actually becomes abusive towards his wife where she's pregnant. And he has these horrible dreams of the concentration camp, especially what the Bird had done to him. And he wakes up and he's literally choking his wife. And he wakes up and he's choking his pregnant wife. And his anger is just out of control. And he resorts to drinking. So he's drinking too much, he's angry, and his marriage looks like it's ending. And the odd part is, and this is the point of the story, he really is broken. Now he's broken due to anger. He just lives with rage and drunkenness. And how he gets out of it is actually, and this is the whole point of the book, how he gets out of it is really through religion, through prayer. It's through God that really heals him. And he really does become healed. And that's why the book is called Unbroken. It's not unbroken because you can't break him. He was thoroughly broken. But it's prayer that makes you unbroken. It's his communion with God that really does save him. And he ends up saying, like, at this point, he says, all life is this beautiful miracle. And he does spend the rest of his life serving God. And interestingly enough, when the Olympics go to Japan, they get him to run the torch through Japan. And he was so angry that he used to, before he took up prayer, he was so angry he wanted to sneak back to Japan and find the guards and kill them, and especially find the bird and kill him. But after really he takes up this life of prayer, he becomes unbroken. And so when he goes back to Japan, this time he wants to meet the guards, really because he wants to offer them forgiveness and love. And he even wants to meet the bird and offer the bird forgiveness and compassion. And of course, the bird's a coward, so he keeps running away. But really, it's a story about how prayer makes you unbroken. So I'm sitting in the movie theater, and when the angels don't show up, I turned to my mother and I said, I think they're going to edit God out of the story. And yes, they did, which misses the entire point. And even Angela Jolie, who is the director, who she deserves, good credit because she's beautiful, but she missed the point of the story. And she says in an interview, they asked her in an interview, well, what did you learn from Louis' book? And she said, well, there seems to be a power beyond human life, but I don't know what to call it. Really? It's in the book. It's called God. The stubbornness of refusing to admit that. But in a way, Louis' story is just like the gospel, the same point. And the point is, it's prayer that can make us unbroken. We are broken, just like Louis was. And horrible things happen in life, and it's going to break you. And that's why, I really hate, in fact, if you say this to me, I will jump down your throat. Have you ever heard people say, well, God won't give you more than you can handle? I hate that. Not only do I find it stupid, and yeah, I'm using hard words, but when people say that to you, that is just their way of signaling they're not going to offer you any compassion. That's really what it means. They're not going to enter into your pain. You can handle it. There are things in life that will break you. I'm sorry. When they say that God will never give you more than you can handle, life sometimes can be cruel. Cancer happens, houses burn down, people go through terrible pain. And like Louis, even if you're incredibly willful, it can break you. And the point of Louis' life is it's prayer that lends us a way out. Life can break us, but God gives us a way out. And the way out is a life of prayer. And that's what the gospel is about. That in the gospel, you have this really odd story. Now, to explain this, I have to kind of go to the nerdy side of myself, which is most of it, and kind of explain what the Greek really says. Because, the English is not right. So what it says in English is a bunch of things. One is, and I love this odd language, is that Jesus goes from praying in the synagogue to the house of the apostles, which is key, because in case you don't notice it, you are right now in the house of the apostles. And one of the family members is sick, Peter's mother-in-law. And what it literally says in the Greek is Jesus forgave the fever. And that's a really odd language. Jesus forgave the fever. And it's clunky that way because it's supposed to make you think in this sense. Jesus forgives us. We're in the house of the apostles. And it's all of us that have some fever. She's down with this fever that keeps her half dead and half alive. All of us have some fever that is preventing us from a full life. For Louis, the fever was his anger and rage and hurt. And it's Christ that heals her. And what it says in the Greek, literally it says, Christ raised her up, which just FYI, that's how you say resurrection in Greek. It speaks about this new life he offers her. And it's through prayer. And even, it's odd language, but after that, it says, you know how it says they brought him the sick and those who are possessed by demons? What it literally says in Greek is they brought all those who were in a bad way to Jesus. It's not just talking about medically those who are ill. It says those in a bad way. And if you know your history, that's important because the first name that was given to our church was people of the way. That Christ came to show us the way into life. So all of us, in a way, all of us here, we know what it's like to be in a bad way. We've all been that way. We're going down the wrong path, whether it's the path of, like Louis, anger or selfishness or greed or ego. That's a bad way. Christ came to show us the way to life. And so it's more than just about medically Jesus healing somebody. It's about offering us a new way. And in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus actually, and I'm going to repeat this so you'll get tired of it, Jesus really doesn't do much preaching in the Gospel of Mark. We have very little of his preaching. What he does is a lot of praying and healing. And it's always the same pattern. He prays and then he heals. He prays and he heals. So you see the pattern. Jesus just goes to synagogue, and you know, as soon as it says that he's prayed, you know there's going to be greater healing. And the point being is something for us, that our life should have this pattern of prayer and then healing. And oddly enough, scientifically, I've mentioned this before, they've found that those people who pray regularly throughout a life, medically, you do change. Your brain literally restructures, where people who pray, they have more cerebral activity in their frontal cortex, less stress hormones, less heart problems, and this is kind of a key one, the more you pray, the more you test out to be empathetic towards other people. So think about this. In the Gospel of Mark, it's this pattern of prayer and then healing. Literally. When you pray, your body is literally changing. But it's also prayer and compassion. When you pray, you actually are inch by inch making yourself more empathetic. So think about this. If you're somebody who has a lot of compassion, if they're suffering, you get in there and help them because you're compassionate. You feel that pain. And that's the key word. I don't know what that's about. But you also have this strange, keeps you awake. You also have this strange, so I'm going to tighten it down. You also have this strange language where Jesus heals her, and the mother-in-law, she's near death, and Jesus heals her, and it says, she immediately got up and served them. Now, that should strike you as strange, because if I was on my deathbed and I was healed, I would work it a little. I would be like, well, could you get me a cup of coffee and maybe a little chocolate? I can't vacuum. But she's the opposite. It says she immediately got up and served them. The healing is that you care about other people. In fact, I just had a funeral yesterday, and this woman who died, the kids are my age. The crack me up, they chose this as the gospel reading because they said that was our mother. That their mother loved people at their house. They always had tons of parties and laughter. But they said, our mother prayed a rosary every single day. And she was fiercely, I like that, she was fiercely compassionate, always caring for other people. Prayer, service. And even like she comes home from the hospital after this, I think it was like this terrible heart attack. She comes home and they want her to rest, and her husband unfortunately says, I feel like fried oysters. And her kids say, no, you will stay in bed, because they know what their mother's going to do. So as soon as their kids left, guess what she did? She made this huge dinner, a fried oyster and a cake, and like, she immediately got up and served them. It becomes your nature that you're compassionate towards other people. I'm not just saying that in Scripture. Scientifically, with brain scans, they have proved that. So the whole point is that this gospel is talking about the purpose of prayer. And one more thing to draw out the nerdiness. The other thing I love about Jesus in the Gospel of Mark is that Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, there's always something wild and untamed about him. Like Jesus in the Gospel of Luke is very prim and proper. Jesus in the Gospel of Mark is always saying that there's something wild about him. So, like in today's Gospel, when the disciples, it says in English, it says they sought him out, they were looking for him. Literally it says they were hunting him like an animal, because there is something wild about Jesus. And even at the very beginning of the gospel, where is Jesus? Amid the wild animals. Or in Mark, if people say something, he'll snort like a war horse. And it's making this point that, Jesus just does not fit into prim and proper society. He's like somebody from Nebraska. They just don't fit in. And think about this. Too often, the image of Jesus has been hijacked to this image of social convention, of being prim and proper. And why Mark is doing this? He's saying something about prayer, that the more and more you pray, the more natural you become. The more and more you pray, the more you become exactly as God intended to you. Not conforming to what society thinks you should do. The more and more you pray, the more you go back to the original state that God intended human beings. That's the prayer life Jesus is offering us. And so, as I said, the whole purpose of this gospel is, what is the purpose of prayer? Prayer leads to healing, leads to a life of compassion, leads to this wild state of serving other people. And I have huge problems with people who, especially like the more evangelicals, that, they misuse prayer as if prayer is treating God as the big candy machine in the sky. You pray because I want a truck. That's just a form of selfishness. If that's your definition of prayer, it's not going to make you more compassionate. It's going to make you more selfish. You pray and you pray and you pray, so immediately you get up and show compassion to other people. You become this untamed force of exactly what it means to be a human being. That's the purpose of prayer. And I don't know if you know this, but Catholics in the early church, it's written right there in the the Acts of the Apostles. Catholics are obligated, even today if you read it, we're obligated to pray 5 times a day, little bits of prayer throughout the day, so that your whole day is this communion with God, that it frees you to become a true human being. Morally, and this is true, morally, if you don't know this, you actually are obligated to pray 2 times a day. And the whole point of it is, like Louis, like Peter's mother-in-law, we all are struck with a fever. We're all in some way, in a bad way. And it's through our communion with God, Christ. It's through that communion that's going to heal us. And it's making the point that it's prayer that makes us unbroken.